have a word of prayer and then we'll get on with it. Father, thank you for these stalwart souls that want to know, warts and blemishes and all, what went before us, so that we can know who we are and we can speak from the heart, knowing who we should be and who you want us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, the reason I put this little guy up here is because it can seem like, if you're just talking dates and stuff that's happened, it can seem like, well, geez, how in such a short time did the church get from here to here? Well, I want you to bear in mind, we've gone through 500 years. 500 years. And if you put that into context, 400 years ago, the only feet that had trod the United States of America were in a little outpost called Jamestown. Now there's some caveats to that. The lost colony from Sir Walter Raleigh was gone, and of course the Spanish had come up the Mississippi.
Don't forget the Vikings.
Yeah, of course. But generally speaking, my point is, and I'm not disparaging the Native Americans at all, but from coast to coast, north and south, that was one empty place. And look what it is now in 400 years. Now granted, they didn't have the technological revolution back during the beginning of the church, but still, communication happened, things changed, and we've been through a number of years. And I'll reiterate again that we have just touched the surface. But again, I can't talk about every church father or every crooked pope or any of that, or we would be here probably longer than God's going to give me on this planet. So we're going to progress. Now we're up around in here tonight, and by this time, the church controlled religion. Now we're still west, mind you. We're going to leave the eastern guys alone until next week. The church controlled religion, philosophy. Remember, Constans shut down Athens, the school of philosophy in Athens. He shut it down. So they controlled philosophical thought. And if you've studied philosophy, you say, well, that's no big loss. But originally philosophy was, once again, the search for truth. So the main university that had been there for almost 1,000 years in Athens, he shut it down. I guess the search for truth was no longer relevant, even back then. They controlled morals, politics, art, and education. If you take all those things as a whole, what did they control? They controlled life. And they did. The church was in every niche of a person's life. Okay? It was theologically sick, and what theology it professed led to serious corruption. Rome no longer taught the Bible. Period. It did not teach the Bible. While it was not officially declared until 1870, oddly enough, they hadn't learned anything by 1870. In 590, Pope Gregory the Great said that he himself was servant of servants. And the other four bishops didn't amount to anything. He was the man. And you'll notice the church deemed it wise to name Gregory Great. Now, I liken this to a minister of God's Word today being worth $40 million. I'm just saying.
There needs to go with that too.
I'm just saying. If you're truly following the mission of spreading Christ's Word and following the ideal of the apostles, even if through some modus operandi you were paid that much money, you would use it for other purposes. I can't imagine the servant of servants being called the Great. We don't even call Jesus the Great. Okay. But that's where the church was heading. Rome taught that all who did not acknowledge the Pope as God's representative on earth and the Roman Catholic Church as the only true church were damned. Were eternally lost if they did not honor the Pope as God's personal representative. And again, remember we talked about this. This all goes back to the claimed linkage to Peter. Now, by this time, they're still hearkening back to their Petrine, what they call it in theological assemblies, their Petrine roots. I say again, imagine what you know about Peter. Peter, like all of us, certainly was a clown at times. Certainly made some mistakes, had some poor judgment occasionally. But Jesus honored him along with the other apostles to be one of the ones that spread his word, and he was one of the pillars of the church. Can you imagine Peter
The Great?
Calling himself the Great?
Yeah.
There was a Peter the Great, but he was in Russia, and that, by the way, that's an interesting biography. You should read about Peter. Anyway, this is the direction and the theology that was being taught. Now, you remember, I think it was week before last, we were talking about some of the heresies within the church. We talked about a fellow named Pelagius. Pelagius was the guy that said that there was no fall from grace. The story of Adam and Eve and the disobedience of God, that didn't really happen. There was no fall. And that human nature is inherently good. And that we have the power to consistently choose the right instead of the wrong. Well, obviously that flies in the face of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Pelagius' teaching was declared heresy, and he was booted out.
Is that where plagiarism comes from? Anything to do with plagiarism?
It might. I haven't, to be honest with you, I haven't checked it. But it would fit.
Kind of.
It would fit. But by this time, guess what? Rome has accepted, the church has accepted the teachings of Pelagius that they declared heresy 300 years before. Interesting, huh? Now they're teaching that. And why is that? Why do you suppose that they would teach that if you conformed to good things long enough that you would be good? Where before they knew that was nonsense. Why do you suppose they'd accept it in this stage of church life?
Make him great.
It wouldn't make sense, would it?
No, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, because if they already control everything anyway, why would they want people to believe that?
Because they want to control the people. Now, no, because they control all this, but there are a lot of people that don't care anything about this. You know,
Or know anything about it.
yeah, they don't know it, they don't understand it.
They
And
keep
remember
the leaves
now,
below the surface.
who is filling up the
Gods.
old Roman Empire?
Yeah.
The
That's
Huns
right.
and
These guys.
Lombards and all.
So now, in fairness to the church is doing everything they can to avoid the complete disintegration of Western civilization. Because bear in mind, these boys up here, particularly the Huns, they don't know anything about Greek philosophy,
Or Jesus Christ.
or Jesus Christ, or the buildings, although some of them do because they've gotten fed by people that have gone up into their areas.
They kind of got the Chinese.
The Chinese faith, yeah.
Mongolian Chinese.
But Western civilization, and you think about, we had the good fortune to go to Athens, and we've seen the Parthenon. We've seen much of what we've talked about, Jeannie and I have, in our past discussions. All of that was going to disappear and become just like monuments for sightseers like they are today. But the difference is we know, because our civilization did not collapse, we know who built those buildings and what went on there, okay? The Western Empire was looking at the dissolution of all that. So, to throw some fairness the way of the church, they were struggling in a power vacuum, because remember, everything has gone east to Constantinople. They were struggling in a power vacuum to hold all this together. Now, did they make some wrong decisions? Absolutely, because their job was to defend the faith, not to become politicians. I personally feel like that God would have done what needed to be done,
right,
if this deserved to be preserved. I don't think he'd have let it disappear. I don't know what he would have done, but he would have done something. But the church stepped in, and as a result of that, as these, the Lombards, Burgundians, Franks particularly, as they came down and were converted, to control them, again, there's a difference between conversion and believing. Okay? Now, think of it this way. I have a friend who's a pastor of a church. I won't say where or anything else. And he is a very emotional preacher. Fire and brimstone and all that, and I mean, and again, that's fine. There are places for that. But he's like that all the time. Makes me a little skittish, but, you know, it doesn't make it untrue because I don't like to hear it. I just get tired of it. I know, believe me, where I was going before I accepted Christ. But in any event, he has that kind of pull where there was never a Sunday that went by that 1, 2, 3 people didn't go down the aisle. He went down the aisle, I believe, yada, yada, yada. And you never saw him in church again. I suspect, and again, I don't have a history here, I suspect that we have a lot of people on the rolls that aren't here on Sunday. Some may come Easter, some may come Christmas, I don't know. It's not my business. But there are a lot of people who profess Christ who aren't converted at all. At all. So, same thing happened here. They may claim that they're members of the church. That doesn't mean the way they behave has changed any. They may go right on pushing people out and taking their stuff and everything else. So the church was stepping in. Now the point is that by accepting the teachings of Pelagius, the church could teach obedience
ENCE.
Yeah, thank you. Obedience to what?
The church.
The church for salvation, not Christ. Now, why do you suppose that they would think this would be effective?
Power struggle.
Well, that's certainly partially true. See, the thing is, this is a real world now. This is a real world. And these people were not especially genteel. They were brutal people, or could be.
Grabbing power.
Absolutely. They only recognized their own, and even within their own, if somebody stepped out to challenge them, they didn't have a problem doing them to death. I mean, this was a brutal world. Still is. But this was more face-to-face brutality than something from 100 miles away and you push a button. These guys needed to be controlled. Because remember, not everybody living here was a Lombard, a Burgundian, or a Frank. There were still a lot of the natives that lived in that area too, so they were looking to the church for protection. So, I hate to put it this way, but the church kind of sold its soul in order to fill a political need. But by teaching largely ignorant people that you could, by obeying the dogma of the church and performing the sacraments that we talked about last week, you'd be all right. Just do what we tell you to do. Do what we tell you to do. Now, given this, what do you think the impact to society would actually be?
Well, the everyday person back in those days would not have had a Bible to read.
Oh,
So they had to be told what, and so the church told them what the Bible, or the Old Testament, that's all they had at that point, and the letters and so forth, but they kind of told them what they needed to believe out of that.
that's if they wanted to tell them. So,
Not for control, didn't they?
exactly. They told them exactly what led to have them obey the church and follow the sacraments.
Here are the works you need to perform, and if you do these, you'll be saved.
It became a religion of works.
And that was in Latin.
Yeah.
Well,
ignorant.
Of course. Understand that by this time, the only real centers of education were in the monasteries. Those are the only places that learning continued. There may be some people in Rome, or what became the Papal States, that were involved in that as well. But daggone it, the priests couldn't even read.
Well, Alexandria and the library was way out of, they couldn't get to it.
Well, it was burned down by now.
Yeah.
It was gone. Because the church had come to consider all pre-Christian writing to be pagan writing and not to be read. So what Aristotle taught, and Aristotle got a lot of stuff right. All those things, Euclid and his geometry, all of that was mystic and magic. It was to be done away with. You
why-
only know what we want you to know.
That's why they believed the earth was flat
Well,
at that time.
and I don't blame them for trying to get rid of Euclid, frankly, but yeah, I struggled with that. But anyway, that's what's going on. So the people that are out, that basically are struggling with a subsistence living, they don't care about what they need to do. They just want to know what it is so they can not go to hell. And this is what the Pope's telling them. Pope wouldn't lie to them, so that's what they start doing. Okay? That's what they start doing. But here's the problem. And you think about it, if I were to say I'm a Christian, but every time Brian and Phil saw me, I was stinking drunk in a ditch. Well, we don't have to worry about a proper witness, because all I have to do is go confess my sins and I'm all good again. So morality went down the tubes as well. What was meant to keep people in line gave them license to do whatever pretty much they wanted to do, and as long as they went and confessed it. Now originally penance, let's say I owe Brian $5 and I decide not to pay him. And Brian goes to the priest and tells him, hey, that guy Dave, he's a bad guy. He won't make right. Well, penance originally was for me to stand outside the front of the church and tell everybody as they came into the church what a bad guy I was. That was penance. But it became ritualized. So that after a while, that's where the say 5 Hail Marys and 10 Our Fathers and you're good to go. It became ritualized. Originally it was, if you had done something wrong and you were seriously contrite and you went to the bishop, you were going to be made to do something humiliating. And frankly, isn't that how, when I was a kid, I was humiliated by my dad whenever I did something wrong? I was either humiliated in public or I was humiliated in my bedroom on my backside.
Yep.
I mean, that made sense. But after a while, it wasn't public penance that would make the grade, and therefore they came up with confession to a priest.
The Chinese used to put, they'd lock these boards around your neck and make you carry that around, telling what your crime was or what your...
Well, even in the Civil War, a soldier had to wear a wagon wheel on his back or a number of different things. If he had displayed cowardice, he had to walk through his regiment like that. Now, of course, we have learned from that, I think, but that was not an uncommon practice. And the idea was that it would spur someone on to behave differently in the future. Like the idea behind prisons is rehabilitation, at least in theory. It was the same type of thinking, but they went beyond that. So basically, not only for the mass, you, I, and the guy down the street, but also for the clergy, this made it very simple to do what you wanted to do.
And look where they are today.
Well, to do what you wanted to do, and then just go say, I'm sorry, and perform whatever penance, if they even ask for it.
Isn't that essentially what they're doing today, people in general, is it's easier to say I'm sorry after you've done something wrong than to ask for permission to do it.
Kathy, I'll go beyond that. And we talked about this in the other class too. Who defines what's wrong? Right? Do I even have to say I'm sorry? It's not wrong to me. Who are you to tell me? And that basic premise right there, I believe, is leading to the dissolution of our society.
Well, that's where we got all the
Yeah.
laws, but then they don't use the law.
Well,
They don't enforce them.
exactly. Because there's half of the country that doesn't want to enforce the laws. And instead of being a citizen, they want to find ways to abridge the laws, or to ignore them, or tie them up in court for years and years with some, but that,
Without law, you have chaos. I mean, total and complete.
Look what's
No
happening in
kidding.
the South
I don't
right
want to
now.
live in a world of chaos.
Yeah.
Coming.
It's been prophesied.
you're going to get me somewhere
Sorry.
that I don't want to go.
Won't get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
No, you, and I don't,
Already there.
We're in controlled chaos as it is.
Yeah, we're already
Indeed.
there.
and the control is slipping. And I don't want to be, I have resolved to know nothing in front of you but Christ and Him crucified. That is my life verse. Because I'm telling you, you read the book, you know what's going to happen. And I hate it. I hate it because I have grandkids. I hate it because my grandkids are going to have kids. I hate it all.
It's coming.
But we know what's going to happen. The only thing is praise God, we're not going to be here to see it.
That's sad too.
Of course it's sad. But
My grandchildren.
that goes back to the burden that I have is why aren't we doing anything about it? Why aren't we in the streets telling people, you know what? You may not have another day to make up your mind. And we're supposed to love these people, and we won't even talk to them about Jesus Christ? And again, I'm not indicting anyone. I'm just saying that I'm not going to be one of those guys out on the street corner with a sandwich board on going, the end is here, the end is... No, because there have been enough people that have damaged the church by doing that in the past, because even Jesus didn't know when He was going to come back.
Ones that put dates on it.
Yeah, and He
Real funny.
told us that He did not know. Only the Father knows. So I'm going to tell you right now, no crackpot in California knows the date and time that He's going to come back.
Yeah, but if you send them money, they'll send you prayer.
Well,
rag.
of course. Of course. I don't begrudge a man trying to make a living. But
I've seen the prayer rags.
But I know that he's just trying to make a living. Anyway,
Using the system.
enough down that rabbit trail. But this is where the church has come. Okay? And again, there were reasons behind it. I'm not saying good ones. But have you ever been in the moment where you made a decision or even just thought something that might solve a problem short term that was immediate, that may not have been the best solution long term?
Oh yeah, I've thought about
Of course. Of course. I really think with the best intentions that that's largely what happened here. However, once it was established, they kept building on it to where the Pope became
Infallible.
the anachronism that we use. He became the Pope. The Pope.
it.
You know, that's what happened. Now, the fundamental thing to remember about this transformation is that salvation now was through the church, not through Jesus Christ. And that is literal. There was no discussion of Jesus Christ. In fact, if you had this long list of things to do, Christ was somewhere down around number 30. They'll add on to this as we go on the visiting or the making of pilgrimages to religious sites, the veneration of relics, praying to the saints for salvation, turning Mary into... They actually, I don't remember what year this was, I'll dig it out for you. They actually decreed that Mary ascended to heaven on her death. Believe me, I've scoured the Bible. I don't find one word.
She's the second most important in the world.
Yeah, I don't find one word of that mentioned. And again, the praying to the saints and all the rest of it. So as a consequence, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, as a consequence, you couldn't go to the smallest village church in Hodunk, Arkansas that didn't have a thigh bone of the Apostle John's. Everybody had something. Some hair off of Jesus' head, a piece of the true cross. Everybody had something. And people were worshiping these things. It's like if you go to visit the chapel in Jerusalem, where the a piece of the true cross is. It's like you get $200 for pass and go. You get time off from and we'll talk about that later.
That's right down here in Buchanan, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's a mountain down here. There's a mountain down in Buchanan. Actually, it burnt down some years ago.
Burned a bunch of times.
Yeah.
I fought fires on that mountain.
The whole and we'll, I'm jumping all around tonight, folks. I'm sorry.
We're leading you astray.
Yeah, well, you're leading me, and I don't mind following.
He's just following down that trail.
Yeah.
That rabbit trail.
You know, I was just thinking, when they had the serpent that Moses would hold up in the wilderness,
The bronze.
and it would keep you from dying, didn't they later try worshiping that serpent and had to do away with it?
The serpent was gotten rid of.
Yeah.
Pretty quick.
Yeah, for
Pretty
that very
quick.
reason, same type of thing.
Exactly. Now, there were also two churches. The clergy had nothing to worry about. Now, as a general rule, it did not necessarily include all the village and parish priests, but the bishops, the archbishops, the Pope, needless to say, and the cardinals later when they came along. We don't have cardinals yet. This was the true church. These were the great initiated into the true church. Out here were the great unwashed. In other words, everyone else. And they were committed to the sacraments, to the veneration of relics, to the pilgrimages, all the rest of that hoopla. These people obviously were not committed because they're making the rules for what these guys got to do. Kind of like Washington and us.
And they truly look at us probably the way the clergy looked at those.
I guarantee you, a lot of them do. I guarantee you.
On
Yeah,
both sides.
We're the podunks.
But there are two churches. These folks, when they die, go to purgatory. Nothing biblical about purgatory, but they go there because they're not completely sanctified yet. They have not attained that state of goodness that is required to enter heaven. Another thing comes about. Okay, you've got Billy Bob down here in purgatory. And truth be known, Billy Bob may have been better than a lot of these folks. But in theory, Billy Bob's in purgatory.
He's hung.
Yeah. He's in purgatory. He's my uncle.
So you can pray him out of there.
Every
Came out of there.
every pilgrimage I go on will get years off of him being in purgatory. Every relic I venerate will get years off of his purgatory. And there's actually a list of penances or things that you can do and how many years you get off for that.
Isn't that Martin Luther's gripe about?
One of them.
Yeah.
I got some gripes with Luther too, but.
Yeah. Well, no.
But anyway.
That mountain's just not big enough for all those people.
Amen. But this is what's going on. And do you see where they have sunk to? This is where they are. Now, the thing is, nobody can tell me where my Uncle Billy Bob is. They can't tell me where purgatory is. Not only that, they can't tell me how many years on his sentence in purgatory that he has. So I can do all this stuff if I live to be 100 and still not have any idea where he is. But this is what's going on. So the bottom line is, it has become a racket. The church has become a racket. And this is the only church. This is the church. There's nowhere anyone else can go. I live in Botetourt County. The Pope says this. I don't know any better. There is no Bible I can read. Jerome finally translates it into Latin, the Latin Vulgate. I can't read Latin. I don't even read English that well. It's not in my language. So they don't know. A lot of people stop caring about the faith altogether. Because what they do see is the bishops are fat and happy. The archbishops are even fatter. The priests control them in their villages and hamlets. And they may be ignorant, but they eat better than the other folks. So a lot of people aren't paying attention at all. So after a while, the church forces them to. You will go to Mass. You will take the sacraments. You will support your priest. And if you don't, it's not going to be good for you.
And you will buy little candles.
Yeah. It will not be good for you.
How did they enforce it?
We'll find that out.
Excommunication.
Well, if you don't believe anyway, excommunication wouldn't have a lot of impact
Here's-
unless you couldn't do business.
Here's the
Other
problem.
things too. Torture,
A lot of people,
Inquisition.
don't misunderstand me, there wasn't a mass exodus away from the church. Because most people, especially the nobles, the higher-ups, the landowners and all that, most people still believed in the concept of their sin. I mean, looking at the world around them, it wasn't hard for them to believe that sin and evil existed. And they wanted an escape from that. This was the only one being offered. This was it. Now there's something else that happened. Let me take a second and get back on track. Okay, salvation, the Roman Church alone, salvation by works. And this, they taught that we had this Now we've gotten to a system of salvation by works. But they have been taught that the good works that they might do on their own, like a Samaritan helping someone out of the ditch, not so much. It was the good works that the church prescribed. Okay, now your neighbors may think you're a mighty nice guy if I help Brian out of the ditch and bandage him up and get him up to Kathleen so she can yell at him for falling off a wagon or something.
She might throw me back in the ditch.
But that doesn't count, so to speak.
Wasn't good enough.
What was good is what the church said was good. Okay? Faith was no longer trust in Christ. Faith was trust in the church. See the difference? Now you and I may think, knowing what we know today, that faith in the church is not a bad thing. Because I have faith in Phil, I have faith in Brian, I even have faith in Al.
Big mistake.
Watch out, the screen's gonna change.
But I know that even though I feel like I can count on them in an extremity, that's not going to save me. Not for heaven anyway. It may save me out of a ditch, but it's not going to get me salvation. The faith had now become in the church. By faith in the church and the good works prescribed by the church. I'll put it to you this way. See any similarities in those two? The Church of Christ had become just like the Hebrew synagogue or the Hebrew temple at the time of Christ. It was all about, hey, if you follow the laws or the 620 some other things that we overlaid on top of them, if you can follow all them, you're a righteous man. Or a righteous woman. Become the same way 1,000 years later. If you follow our rituals, if you follow our laws, you will be well. In neither case does it have anything to do with the heart of God and the blood of Christ. In neither case. Now we're going to jump forward, just for the sake of conversation for a minute, to today. How much, let me tell you something. In some ways, I'm certainly not going to claim that we're radical. In some ways, the Baptist denomination is as pharisaical as either one of these. So are the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, yada, yada, yada. The Mennonites, you name them. We have established our own concord of laws. When I was a kid, in our church, you couldn't dance. You just couldn't play cards. Couldn't do any of that stuff.
Couldn't go to the movies.
Where did that come from? Where did that come from?
Hopefully it was parental guidance.
Well, yeah, but It wasn't.
Yeah. Wasn't
Now, I don't know, at that age, I don't know if that was part of the, well, I know that there is many different kinds of Baptists as there are colors in the rainbow. I know that. I don't know if that was part of the official Baptist creed or if that was our particular church. I don't know. But it was, probably today, it's the biggest Baptist church in Northern Virginia. This was 60 years ago. But that's what we were taught. At one point, when I was 16, I was misbehaving somewhat. And my mother asked me if I would go talk to the pastor, have a meeting with the pastor. I said, sure, Mom. I love my mother. I said, I'll go talk to the pastor. The pastor told me to my face that if I continued doing, remember I'm 16, if I continue doing the things I was doing, I was going to hell. Let me tell you, compared to today, I wasn't doing nothing.
Shame on you.
I wasn't doing nothing. But I mean, the Protestant Reformation needs to be reformed again. You know, and we'll get to that, but
It hasn't taken very many years to get there either. 'Cause
No.
I can remember in a Presbyterian church in New York State, we didn't do anything. We weren't allowed to. My dad, up till the day he died, said, you are not going to the movies. You're not going to support that bunch of bad people.
yeah.
And look where it's gone since then.
I mean,
I was an Episcopalian preacher's kid.
you were Episcopalian.
I was an Episcopalian preacher's kid. Maybe 13 people throwing rocks, but I was the one that got saw. I was the only one they saw.
Hey, if it's any consolation, George Washington was an Episcopalian, so.
He did good.
And I think it was, well, no, stop, Brian.
Let me tell you something, on that vein. My dad was a Methodist minister, and they wanted to have a dance at one of the churches. And he made this argument, I think he was way before his time, that they would dance before the ark.
And
Yeah.
he did it naked.
Absolutely.
And rang tambourines and stuff
And
like
Micah
that.
got all bent out of shape when he.
And one of his famous sayings was that you follow church doctrine and it's like a screen door on a submarine.
There you go.
At
And
least.
this was back in the 40s.
Well, and I'll tell you, I'll admit something else. When I was in high school up in Northern Virginia, I dated a Catholic girl for a while. I went to Mass a couple of times, you know. But here's the funny thing. There's not the church she went to, but there was another Catholic church called Our Lady of Good Counsel, OLGC we called it. And you know what? While all this was going on, don't do this, don't do that, you can't, every Saturday night in the youth center at OLGC, they had a dance with a live band. Every Saturday night, so guess where the kids were? We were at the Catholic church.
But your church didn't do that.
Oh.
And you weren't supposed to be over
Yeah.
there.
And
But you were safe. I had that too.
but
That's why his minister told him he kept doing what he was doing.
But can you imagine a pastor saying that to a 16-year-old? Anyway,
Did it scare you?
no.
You just kept on doing it?
No. I kept going to OLGC to the dances on Saturday night. Okay, worshiping of the saints, exaltation of the clergy. This is interesting. Salvation, taken from the hands of God, fell into those of the priest, who set themselves in the place of our Lord. Souls thirsting for pardon were no more to look to heaven, but to look to the church and above all to its pretended head, to these blinded souls, the Roman pontiff was God. Remember, he was God's anointed representative on earth. Hence the greatness of the Pope and what they were able to get away with. Okay. The system of penance we already talked about. Now this is getting a little ahead of ourselves, but another thing that came about that caused Luther some heartburn, well, a lot of people some heartburn.
System of Indulgences.
I'm not as bad a speller as I seem to be. I can't do it when I'm... The Mendicant Friars. That's a mouthful. The Friars, there was, as the monasteries came into being, and the official church, so to speak, there were also people that took more or less holy orders that didn't have a church assigned to them and really didn't want a church assigned to them. So they would go around from village to village, and for, I'm just going to use today's term, I don't know what, depending on where they were, I don't know what their currency was. For 50 cents, whoops, they'd pray for you. For maybe $1, they'd pray for my Uncle Billy Bob. Get him a little more currency to get out of purgatory. These friars, these mendicant friars, they might even offer communion as well. They were itinerant preachers or itinerant church do-gooders. Call them what you want. But they plagued Europe. Over a period of time, it became such a, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it paid off so well that these guys were like flies. They were all over Europe and they were infesting the cities. And the other thing is, they could get people to believe that, look, I got nowhere to stay tonight. Can I stay in your house and feed me dinner? You don't say no to a friar. So into the house he would go.
Probably rob you blind.
Take somebody's guest bed if they had one, and get fed, and then they'd get up and go their merry way. They were living off of society.
Leeches.
Exactly. This became a bone of contention down the road because there were those who said, if you don't get these people out of my town, there's going to be trouble. But this became an issue. And like I said, as more people, and I'm going to tell you why here this happened, as more people became below the poverty line, this was a viable option. I mean, think about it. You don't want to starve to death.
Be like begging.
Yeah. You're offering a service in return. So these guys proliferated. And we don't even know what this means today. But back in the day, they were a nuisance like...
Televangelists.
Televangelists. Okay? So this was another issue that was going on. Now, interestingly enough, during all this time, there were another group of people that came around. The flagellants.
They beat themselves.
Exactly.
They do that in the Philippines now, don't they? Sometimes in Easter.
Probably.
So they beat themselves up for money?
No, they wouldn't do it for money. They did it for penance.
Mm-hmm.
They did it for salvation. And they were actually very heavily regulated. they existed in like a monastery environment, and there were certain times of day, because they didn't want people beating themselves to death. There were certain times of day, and there was a formal procession. They would go out in the market or the town's center, and they would beat themselves, and would get up and troop back to their barracks or monastery or whatever. It was very organized, but then of course there were those who went off on their own, and of course, I don't know what this is going to get you.
Did Dominican Friars, did they have monasteries that they originated from?
No.
They just were street people?
They were street people.
Gotcha.
Street friars. Street friars.
Where did the term friar come from?
I don't know. Frankly, I haven't looked it up.
But isn't that a term that they use in monasteries a lot?
Yeah, depending on the type of monastery, most often a friar is an itinerant preacher. Okay? Most monasteries, even today, there's one up in Berryville, Virginia, as a matter of fact, are monks.
One down Floyd.
Yeah.
Virginia.
In fact, if you live up in Northern Virginia, you go to the grocery store and you'll see monastery bread on the shelves. Up in Berryville, they bake bread. And again, I don't have a problem. I mean,
Cheese too,
yeah,
the nuns.
yeah. I mean, that's fine. If that's how you choose to live your life in your honor, that's fine. But all this other is nonsense. But this is what is going on in the towns and cities and villages in this environment, in this area. The only reason I have this up here again is I want you to be aware of the fact, the system of indulgences. It's not prolific at this stage, but it is coming into being. And what this said was that you can get a piece of paper from the Pope that says you are absolved of all your sins and you can gain entrance into heaven if or for having done something or other. That's going to become a real nuisance down the road, but at this point the church isn't broke. Indulgences becomes a big deal when the church is having financial difficulties. Okay? But one thing that happens is that in 470, let's go forward. Actually, let's go to the last one and work ourselves backwards, Al.
We're on the wrong one there.
Yeah, these are last week's.
How did we do that?
You guys don't trust me with any of that, so I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's not a big deal.
Is it number
Those
11?
barbarian migrations, didn't that water down Greek and Latin? Didn't it have an influence on their language?
Yes,
With
it
all
did.
those people coming in and kind of dilute
Well,
the
yeah,
native?
there became more vernacular languages, meaning the way it was commonly spoken rather than the pure. Yeah, it's just like we today don't speak
English.
English as it was spoken in its pure form, 500 years ago.
I think I got the wrong one.
I love people that use really, really bad English, like double negatives. It's like fingerprints on the, or fingernails on a blackboard.
Well, and we promote that.
Yeah.
Read the billboards and the number of words that are spelled incorrectly today because it's eye-catching. We promote it. Remember, not too many years ago, it was Ebonics. And I'm not trying to be rude, but let's not teach them English. Let's look at this as a cultural thing and support it. Before that,
Now they just have letters.
Phonics, yeah.
We didn't teach kids how to spell.
F and PH are the same thing.
If the way they spelled it made it sound like the word,
That's all it needs.
They taught you how to read when I was in grade school phonetically.
sure.
You learned to read fast,
And
but your spelling was terrible.
well,
That's why I'm such a terrible speller.
Yeah.
and I mean, we do the same things.
I apologize.
Al, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. There are a couple of things that happened, and this is the biggest thing that's important to remember. In 470, yeah. I don't like this guy, so I can't remember when I think it was in 470. No, 570. Guess who was born in 570? He was a descendant of the half-brother of Isaac. Over in the east, in 570, Muhammad was born. In 610, when he was about 40 years old, he started having visions. Now, I don't know what form those visions came in, whether they were dreams or if he was actually having visions. I don't know.
Good drugs.
Well,
Modern.
but his visions were delivered to him by the angel Gabriel. Long story short, he was thrown out of the town that he was in, and he relocated to the city of Medina. It wasn't called Medina then, but I can't spell the Arabic, so. But the town that became Medina. And the few guys that were his followers moved with him, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, we're not talking about Islam, so I'm not even going to go there. Long story short, after the Vandals were driven out of the Near East and North Africa, the Saracens, the Muslims, and the Turks took their place. And in 638, the Muslims took Jerusalem. In 638, and they would hold it for 450 years. Interestingly enough, the Muslims didn't have a problem with the Christians going to their holy sites. I mean, they were pretty open to that. They didn't have a problem with it. But Jerusalem ceased to be, as far as a see of the Catholic Church, Eastern or Western. It ceased to be. And the Ottoman Turks and Saracens continued across North Africa, basically obliterating the church that was still there. And they crossed the same place the Vandals did, and they invaded Spain, or what was called Iberia then, Spain and Portugal. So at one time, all of this, all the way through here, was Muslim. And the Muslims, they called Saracens, Ottoman Turks, whatever you want to choose, they had visions of undoing all this. But a gentleman named Charles Martel defeated them at Tours, and arrested their influx into Europe, and eventually would drive them out of Spain. But they got that far, And the back and forth has been going on ever since. In fact, Spain is replete with Moorish architecture. A lot of what the Moors built, their mosque and so forth, are still standing.
He just visited there.
Yeah.
Same.
Is that not so? I mean, you can still see a lot of it today that's standing. And
Well, even their influence over into the United States and South America has that architectural.
oh yeah,
With the arches and the.
oh sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you get into Central and South America, it's all Spanish. Even in Southwest United States, because of course at one time that was part of Mexico. Till we decided we wanted it.
We all take over Mexico now.
I don't want anything to do with Mexico. I've been there a dozen times and they got nothing I want.
Absolutely nothing.
Needless to say, in 1079, celibacy was mandated for the clergy.
That include the Pope.
Yeah, yeah. What do you suppose that led to? I'm just saying.
Today.
What was the reason? Was it because of what was said in the Bible? Because the Lord said it was better to
Well,
remain that we
Paul
could.
said it would be better for you to be like me.
Yeah,
But if you can't,
right. Then marry.
then marry.
It's better to do that.
Rather
than
than, rather than being a gadabout or Jerusalem gigolo. You know, it's better to be that way. But celibacy became the rule. It was also because of what had been going on before they made this the rule. People being what they are, wired the way they are, you're 23 years old and you go into you become a ordained priest. Maybe not so much. But the immorality, not just sexual, but the immorality in general, had become so much that or so bad, so blatant, that the church attempted to arrest it. Well, it would have made more sense to me to say what Paul said, that look, if you can't deal with this, and again, I haven't met a whole lot of people that could, especially when they were that age, if you can't deal with this, marry. No, we're going to do it the hard way.
Rules. More rules.
Laws and rules.
Just so.
Just so. So this, and what became a real point, oh, we got to go. What became a real point of contention with the people, you can remember where you and I would be in the church, was it was not uncommon to find the priest with their mistress in a bar drinking and gambling. This became common. And if they were caught, so the people were no better than the priests.
Well, isn't that the way it was when the kings of Judah and Israel, I mean, your people set up their morals based on what your leadership did. I mean...
Sound familiar?
That's why they were condemned.
That's why we're living in the society we are.
Yep,
David
same
set a
thing.
good example.
So,
Yeah.
but anyway, this is what was going on. There was no visible difference between the church and the rest of society.
Which is like it's getting now.
It has been like that for a couple of decades or more.
Yeah.
The divorce rate is the same in the church as it is out in society. And all the rest of it. And again, it's not an indictment, I'm just saying it's the same thing. What did Yogi Berra say? Deja vu all over again? Same thing. It's going on. The people were just as immoral. Why shouldn't they be?
Look at the model they were following.
Because, plus the fact, if they just took the time, say on Friday afternoon, went into the church, assuming the priest was sober enough, went into the church, all I had to do was confess and it was all forgiven.
And look today at what happens with presidents who have, and what example is that to our teenage kids? If Clinton can do it, why can't I?
Yeah. Well, there isn't any.
Yeah.
It's been, and in fairness, it's been that way long before Bill Clinton. He was just...
My dad had a very interesting statement. He said about people in this church. He said, these people are really bad. Think how much worse they'd be if they never went to church.
Well, and that's true enough. And maybe we'll do another class some other time, but there's also a point, people that talk about they have a problem with Christianity because if there were a God, why would there be so much evil in the world? Well, you don't really want an answer to that because I can answer it.
Sure.
But the reality is, how do we know how much worse the world would be if God wasn't in control?
If he removed his spirit,
If he had just let us go.
it'd be terrible.
Yeah, we don't have any idea. Along the way, the church vacancies had become so lucrative that they were sold. If you got the money and you want to be an archbishop, you can buy the job. It was called simony. This became another one of the big problems that led to the Reformation. It had nothing to do with call or ability or heart or anything else. You got the ducats, you can have the job.
About the money.
Yep. All about the money. Again, we talked about church tradition took the place of Christ. Church dogma took the place of Christ. Simony. Mild forms, comparatively mild forms of the Inquisition started now. Ferreting out heretics. And heretics were anyone who did not want to follow the dogma of the church. Now, and when I say mild, I mean mild. We're up and around here now. You ain't seen nothing yet.
1200s.
Because oddly enough, the real Inquisition did not come in until after the Protestant Reformation. Ignatius Loyola did not form the Society of the Jesuits until 1534. We haven't gotten to the good stuff yet. The real Inquisition started after we were all Christians.
Was that the Spanish?
Well,
It's the one you hear the most of.
this was the Jesuit, Pope-approved Inquisition that is well known as the Spanish Inquisition. But brother, it was all over the whole continent of Europe. There was no place it didn't go. Anywhere there was a Jesuit, there was the Inquisition. Okay, I really am very sorry that we took so long tonight. I really didn't mean to.